Well, this is a song that I wrote for Maui, who's the spiritual director of Columbus Center for Spiritual Living, several years ago. And there's a story to it, but ask me afterwards because the story goes longer than the song. So, it's called Maui's Meditation. As I sit in quiet solitude, knowing my oneness with all that is divine, I release all thoughts that are not gratitude. I appreciate the gifts that I know are mine. Meditative state that comes over me helps me be at peace within my mind, releasing thoughts that are not serving me, knowing that what I seek I will surely find. Recognition, knowing oneness, affirmation of all that is true, giving thanks and then releasing. That is all that is mine to do. As I look back along the path that's brought me here, following the twists and turns throughout my life, what I thought was negative has turned to positive. What I thought was darkness has turned into light. Teachers came into my life along the way. When I was ready, they just appeared. Taught me how to live by the way that they live themselves, how to release those things that I thought I feared. Recognition, knowing oneness, affirmation of all that is true, giving thanks and then releasing. That is all that is mine to do. As I sit in quiet solitude, knowing my oneness with all that is divine, I release all thoughts that are not gratitude. I appreciate the gifts that I know are mine. I appreciate all the gifts that I know are mine. Thank you. And now, Elizabeth Betzel.
Thank you, Ralph. As always, your music uplifts, and gets us going. That's what I love about your music. Gets the energy flowing. And it's amazing how, we never talk about what we're doing really. I mean, that title's out there, but it's just a perfect fit. Always a perfect fit. I know that because I know what I'm going to say here, but trust me. All right, well, I always like to begin with a little humor. I like to be together that way, kind of relaxes us and prepares us for listening. So I looked hard and long to find jokes on grace, and let me tell you, there aren't any out there. But I persisted, and I succeeded. Well, we'll let you decide whether or not I succeeded after I'm done. So a man dies and goes to heaven. And of course, St. Peter meets him at the pearly gates. St. Peter says, well, here's how it works. You need 100 points to get into heaven. You tell me all the good things you've done in your life, and I will give you a certain number of points for each item, and depending on how good it was. And when you reach 100, you can come in. Okay, says the man. He sat there a little nervous, and he thought a little bit. He said, well, I was married to the same woman for 50 years and never, ever cheated on her, not even in my heart. That's wonderful, says St. Peter. That's worth 3 points. 3 points, the man said. Whew. Well, I attended church every week of my life. I supported its ministry with my tithes and with my service. Terrific, says St. Peter. That's certainly worth a point. 1 point? Golly, how about this? I started a soup kitchen in my city, and I worked in a shelter for homeless veterans. Fantastic. That's another couple points, says St. Peter. 2 points, the man cried. At this rate, the only way I'll get into heaven is by the grace of God. Exactly, son. Come on in. Like I said. But it hits the point, the grace of God is absolutely necessary. But what is grace? It's such a beautiful word that tends to lighten our mood and inspire us when we think of it. I think all of us have had a sense of being touched by grace, probably several times in our lifetime. Yet what exactly is it? It's not a thing that we can touch, although we feel touched by it at times. It's not something that we can see or taste or hear, even though we can see the effects of grace in our lives and in the lives of others. It's not something that we can taste. Grace is not something that we can perceive with our senses. And grace is not an emotion. Although grace may produce emotions in us, even profound states of feeling, it is not a thought nor a sensation in our body. So grace is not something we can intuit through our 3 centers of intelligence, our mind, our heart, or our body. Grace is beyond the usual categories of objects and sensory experiences that we have in order to navigate this world. To find the realm of grace, we need to look deeper. Grace is a subtle quality found in the deepest parts of our hearts, woven into the very fabric of our consciousness. Its presence is unmistakable. And we have learned to recognize the sensory signals that let us know that we're in the proximity of this mystery, which is always present, supporting us and guiding us. Rumi described it when he said, something opens our wings. Something makes boredom and hurt disappear. Someone fills the cup in front of us. Grace is the living presence that allows us to access the qualities of our higher true nature, our higher self. There are 4 aspects of grace that I want to call to our attention this morning. First of all, grace is a way of experiencing our ground of humanity. When we are present and able to be with what is in this moment, exactly as it is, without judging it, without resisting it or trying to fix it or deny it, we come to recognize a deeper layer of our true self that is here in the background, regardless of what we are experiencing. We know this part of ourself by many names, such as the divine, our higher self, our essence, the truth of who we are. A second aspect of grace are the gifts it imparts. We have experienced tremendous blessings and benefits that come from contact with our higher self. It is a huge relief to discover the gentle, expansive qualities of our essential nature. Grace holds our difficulties with patience, compassion, and loving kindness. We learn to trust and rely on this fountain of benevolence that is always available, even though we are so often oblivious of its work and existence during our daily routines. Yet in a breath, in a pause, in a single moment when we are willing to notice and sense in the deeper layers of our being, this miraculous quality of blessing is always present, waiting for us. When we allow grace to work in us, it transforms us, both psychologically and spiritually. A third aspect of grace can be seen in this metaphor. We can think of grace as a bridge between our smaller ego self and the divine that expresses each one of us. Grace brings light and compassion to our pain and difficulties and turns them into something that assists our growth. Grace gives us the capacity to be with our experiences so that they can be digested and integrated into our soul's greater purpose. Finally, grace helps us live our realization, allowing us to reach our full potential in every aspect of our outer life, in our work and in our relationships. Grace helps us to live in two worlds at the same time, our inner world and our outer world, and ultimately to see that the two worlds are one. We learn to embody the essential qualities of our divine nature, discerning the meaning of Jesus' advice, to be in the world but not of it. We find blessings in the small events of daily life. We see the miracles that fill our days. We recognize the preciousness of our journey, of our relationships, and of the people who are in our lives, and learn to appreciate every step of our journey as we take it. This exquisite experience of humanity is available to us every moment of every day, with every breath that we take. Why then do we not avail ourselves of it? What is required to relax into this ground of grace? As it turns out, our active attention attracts the action of grace. When we become actively receptive, consciously inviting this divine awareness in us and around us to do what needs doing, our life unfolds in miraculous ways. This is not an epiphany, it's actually a practice of surrender. Grace always requires some kind of surrender, what the Indian cultures call the dropping of the mind into the heart. There are so many illusions about what we fear, about what we can control, about what is wrong with us and others, that must be surrendered in our practice of attracting the action of grace. When we surrender our illusions of fear and control, when we're open to becoming vulnerable, it is then that we can be touched by grace. We explored vulnerability and its many gifts in my last talk. So this morning I want to focus on the next step that is required to attract the action of grace. We're going to explore how we can create a nonviolent inner world. Shamsuddin Muhammad Hafiz is one of the most beloved of the Persian poets and considered by many from different cultures to be one of the 7 literary wonders of the world. This story, translated by Daniel Ladinsky, which comes from the subject tonight is love, gives us a powerful metaphor for what we're going to explore this morning. Once a young woman asked Hafiz, "What is the sign of someone knowing God?" Hafiz remained silent for a few moments, and then looked deep into the young woman's eyes and said, "My dear, they've dropped the knife. They have dropped the cruel knife so often used upon their tender self and others." Dropping the knife distills one of the most important practices for attracting the action of grace, the need to disengage from judgment, both internalized and projected. All of us are acquainted with our inner critic. It's the part of us that insists on judging ourselves and others. It can compel us to second guess our every step by saying, "That's not enough," "Oh, that's not good enough," or "Whoa, way too much." We see the effect of the inner critic in our lives and in the lives of others. I was enjoying lunch not too long ago with an esteemed colleague of mine. She's one of the most accomplished people I know and has received many awards in recognition of her numerous contributions to our profession. She seemed a little down and shared with me that she was struggling with a letter that she had received from a well-meaning relative that she just couldn't shake off. It was a lengthy critique of why she had not landed a long-term relationship and offered well-intentioned advice on what she should do to become a more successful person in this and other areas of her life. The critique had latched its claws into my friend's own inner judgment, that place inside where she felt most vulnerable. Despite her obvious intelligence and accomplishments, she was under attack from within, desperately fighting the feeling that there was something wrong with her and that she must work harder to fix herself, even though she knew this wasn't a fair judgment and it was not at all true. Sadly, this is a common experience that each and every one of us has struggled with, probably more than once in our lives. The knife of judgment wielded by our inner critic has touched us all. Since the inner critic is part of our psychological nature, we have no choice but to learn to live with it. Learning to dance with our inner critic is a constant practice. And this morning I'd like to share 4 strategies that we can use to disengage the inner critic and create a nonviolent atmosphere which is needed to attract the action of grace in our lives. Strategy number 1, recognize the inner critic and name it. In order to dance with the inner critic, it's necessary to recognize and accept it as a knowable part of life. If you are a human being, you have an inner critic. Recognizing it, however, can require some practice because oftentimes an inner critic appears as our own inner guidance. Realize the inner critic operates on all volumes. Sometimes it operates quietly, just under the radar. At other times, it's easy to recognize because it is loudly insistent. And because it is often the loudest of the interior voices, we often assume that it is right. Don't be fooled. The inner critic becomes active when we're operating on automatic, when we're not present. That is, when we're not questioning, recognizing, and naming it. Anytime the word should is delivered with a tight, hard energy, you know the inner critic is at work. The inner critic can also multiply itself. It can judge the judge. That is, even when you notice that you're wielding the knife of judgment against yourself, the inner critic can jump right in and judge you for judging yourself. You may notice that just under all this mental activity, the inner critic produces, there is emotion. A lot of times it's a negative emotion. We often feel fear, apathy, resignation, anger, shame, or guilt when the inner critic is active. We need to learn to sit with these unpleasant emotions when they arise and to recognize that it's not we who are inadequate. We are perfect, whole, and complete, just as we are. It is your ego, however, which is inherently inadequate because it is based on a false sense of yourself. Name the critic by calling out. I often say things like, "Oh, really? Thanks for sharing that useful piece of information." Think up some sarcastic phrases that you can use and see how effective they can be from disengaging from the judge and his critical parts. You've already got to my 3rd strategy, but you're going to have to wait. Strategy number 2. Once you have a little distance from your inner critic, you can vary your communication style. One effective way to communicate with your inner critic is to exaggerate its judgment. So let's pretend you're hearing, "Wow, you're such a jerk." Well, you can answer the inner critic by saying, "Yeah, you're absolutely right. I am a total and complete jerk. In fact, there's no bigger jerk than me. I am at least 1,000 times more worse than anyone else." And if you're skilled at exaggerating, you'll find yourself smiling at the absurdity of it, and that's the whole point. Rather than arguing with the inner critic and trying to move against its energy, move with its energy, making it bigger and bigger and bigger until it's completely ludicrous. It puts the initial statement in a completely different framework. Another effective way to communicate with your inner critic is to agree with it. This is especially effective when you're moving into new territory. And the voice in your head says, "You know, you have no idea what you're doing. This is totally insane." The inner critic is actually right on track here. You don't know what's going on. How could you? You're in new territory. You're on a trust walk. So agree with your inner critic. "You know, you're absolutely right. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm choosing this because it's what I must do." Communicating with your inner critic is to learn to dance with it rather than to let it control you. Here we are, strategy 3. Meet the inner critic with humor. Mark Coleman offers this strategy for dancing with the inner critic in his book entitled "Make Peace with Your Mind, How Mindfulness and Compassion Can Set You Free from the Inner Critic." Mark Coleman shares, in my workshops, I make a point of bringing humor and levity to the subject of the inner critic. I will often tell a story of how you just can't win with the inner critic, as a way of pointing out the humor of it. For example, you might set your alarm early in the morning because of some noble intention that you have. Maybe you want to get up and meditate, or you want to go for a run, or you want to do some chores before work. And then the alarm goes off, and the inner critic, disguised as your life coach, whispers in your ear, you know, it's really early, and you are so tired, and they say it's really important to get enough sleep. So you hit the snooze and hit the pillow for another hour. Then when you finally wake up, what happens? The inner critic greets you and gets on your case, this time not as your friendly coach, but as your inner tyrant. Why didn't you get up when the alarm went off? How come you can't follow through on even the simplest things? Why don't you exercise in the morning? You're never going to get in shape. Just another thing to add to your list of failures. So you see, you're doomed if you listen, you're doomed if you don't. You just can't win. So it's important to see it's important to see the humor in it. I've already mentioned that noticing and naming the critic provides some distance to dance with it. Mindfulness also provides some space, the space needed to see the humor in the inner critic. If we're too close, we get identified with that critical voice and get caught up with its judgments and suffer unnecessarily. That's the bar. It's unnecessary suffering. It is the space of awareness and non-identification that gives us the perspective to see the irony of our human condition. We can actually take a tip from the comedians that we so enjoy. They use humor to point out our foibles and our quirks, and we're not offended. In fact, we laugh. We can do the same with our inner critic and point out its idiosyncrasies. One way to do this is to make a joke of your own not-so-perfect habits, which the inner critic would usually chastise you for. So many of you know that I'm a math professor at Columbus State Community College. And I will confess that even after earning a master's degree in mathematics, I do not do simple arithmetic very well. I often make simple arithmetic mistakes when I'm teaching my class. My students are all confused because they don't realize that, yes, I'm full of arithmetic mistakes. So instead of allowing the inner critic to chastise me for this imperfection, I tell my students right up front, I want to keep you engaged, so I am going to make many, many simple arithmetic mistakes, and it's your job to find them. Why is it my job to do all the work? That's not very fair. So this is not to abdicate responsibility. It's not about getting down on yourself. What it is about not getting down on yourself for the small things in life, the particular quirks of your nature that will most likely express themselves at the most inopportune moments. Those very quirks are what make each one of us uniquely human. Listening to all the demands of your inner critic and engaging in a never-ending quest to be perfect, that's not the solution to this problem. In a comic strip called Rhymes in Orange by cartoonist Hilary Price, there's a cartoon titled The Checklist of Feeling Pathetic. It depicts some of the ways we sadly and comically wield the knife of judgment against ourselves and make ourselves feel terrible. In one caption it says, think of all the people you regularly disappoint, especially those who share your last name. My favorite caption says, relive embarrassing and awful moments that occurred many, many, many years ago. When we find the humor in our inner critic, we take its judgments less personally. We join the human race and connect with others in our common humanity. We see that our mind's a little crazy at times, and it's okay to take that lightly. Strategy number 4, pay attention to your heart. When the inner critic is active, it's easy to lose contact with your heart. The negative judgment of the inner critic can ignite big emotional reactions that can send us spiraling into despair, far removed from being connected to our heart's energy and intelligence. More than a strategy, the practice of bringing your attention to your heart supports your commitment to attract the action of grace. You may remember from the last talk that I gave that connecting to the sensations and energy of your heart helps you to be open and kind and receptive to yourself. Your heart center provides the way to your own inner truth and has a gentling effect on the harshness of the inner critic. When you have changed your focus of attention from the activity of the inner critic to this potent center of love and compassion, you are offering a soothing balm, a medicine that allows you to harness your active attention, which is needed to attract the action of grace. When practicing the surrender that is required to attract the action of grace, it's easy to get caught up in seeking grace, while not recognizing that we are already in and a part of it. Perhaps you've heard the term non-duality, which literally means not two. Non-dual awakening is important because it dissolves separation that we feel, ending the search for grace, for love, for peace, and for freedom. It restores awareness that we are and always have been a part of everything that our heart desires. Non-dual awakening means not only tasting grace, but also recognizing that you are grace. You cannot talk yourself into this. You cannot intellectualize or theorize. You can only enter more deeply into your own direct experience and surrender. Then the mystery that has been living through you all this time has a space to come freshly alive. Wherever you find yourself right now on the path toward grace, just be as you are. Rest in God, right here, right now, with whatever is in your life in this moment. There is nowhere else you need to go. May we allow grace to bring infinite riches and meaning into our life and deeper peace into our troubled world. May grace become our way. Let's close in a word of prayer. As we close our eyes and turn within, we acknowledge that we are in the presence of grace, that we are indeed the expression of grace, that upward pull of the universe lifting us to the heights of our divine nature. May we make it a practice to drop the knife of judgment that we wield against ourselves and others. May we be open and receptive to the work of grace in our lives. By recognizing our oneness with God, our oneness with ourselves, and our oneness with each other, may we be a channel for grace to do its mighty work in our troubled world. And so it is. Amen.
Let me hear an amen.
Amen. Amen.
Which is the title of this song. It came to me actually in a dream sort of thing. I woke up singing this song and had to search around for paper and pencil and write words. But the part that you guys are going to sing, it goes like this. Amen, 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 amen. Tricky lyrics, I know. You'll get it. Transformation from within. Amen, amen. That's the place where we must begin. Amen, amen. Peace and love and harmony. Amen, amen. All good things are here within me. Amen, amen. Here we go. Amen, amen. Amen, amen, amen. Amen, amen, amen. Seek the kingdom and you will find. Amen, amen. Just one life, just one mind. Amen, amen. For God is the Father and God is the Son. Amen, amen. God is Spirit and we are all one. Amen, amen. Here we go. Amen, amen. Amen, amen, amen. Amen, amen. Amen, amen. Now when you pray and you truly believe, amen, amen, ask of the universe and you will receive. Amen, amen. And if you have not seen it yet, amen, amen, just remember what you're thinking is what you will get. Amen, amen.
I will repeat the announcements because our friends online may not have gotten them as we ran into some technical difficulties, and we're going to have to just record this for future viewing. But thank you, Elizabeth, for gracing us with your message. Sometimes I even feel my inner critic is inadequate, but you have given me the first useful use of sarcasm. That is a blessing. A great outlet for that. Ralph, when you and Cheryl come in the building, the energy level goes up about 20 times. So thank you so much for coming here today. And special thanks to Linda Hill and Linda Wexner for providing for our gathering feast after the service. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Michael Contras, our stalwart AV tech that's had to wrestle with all manner of foul things besetting us this morning on the technical side.
The gremlins were out today.
You triumphed in the end.
Yes.
So, other announcements. Joe and Joanne will be back next Sunday and will provide the music for the service. Many thanks for everyone who showed up at the church on Thursday to clean, organize, and weed garden beds, and generally give us some TLC. I only regret I wasn't able to come because I'm wrestling with a puppy now. So, but apparently a great time was had by all, and the place, you can definitely see the difference. So thank you so much for your labors on our behalf. Next Sunday, the 29th, we're having a good old-fashioned church potluck after the service. Bring dishes you can. Mary and Jax will be with us, so we'll get a chance to catch up with her. We've got a lot of good cooks here, so so bring it. Any other announcements today? Okay, we're going to circle up for our peace song.